welcome. I'm going to do a review on the Hanwei Raptor Katana. I have two of these little SOBs to twirl around for your education and amusement and informationativeness. These are words that might be important. You should pause if you want to read them. We'll begin with the Moroha Zukuri blade, or Moroha Zukuri, or whatever it's supposed to be called. And let's start with the Raptor series fittings overall. My interpretation or impression of this is that it's well cast. You can make out some very fine details for something that's a cast reproduction or mass production type fitting. And I give my fair share of props to Hanwei for that. They seem to do that pretty well. The Ito on the Raptor is a synthetic suede type material, and it's comfortable in the hand, though on both of my blades it's a little bit loose. The saya on the Raptor series is made out of wood, but it's covered in an ishime finish, or some sort of textured finish that doesn't show fingerprints well. And mine was cracked, so it doesn't hold the habaki well, but look at how well it comes out after it's got a little attention. Details in terms of like nicks and scratches and smudges and fingerprints and cracks can be fixed with glue and Sharpie and still look decent, which I like. In terms of a practitioner piece, I find ishime sayas to be very, very preferable, at least in for my personal taste, just because they get fucked up, and when they get fucked up, that's sad. Anyway, the blade itself, there's not a lot of characteristics to really talk about. There's no hamon. It's made from a through-hardened steel that doesn't show a whole lot of pizzazz, so you get that from the shape. In this particular iteration, it's made from this Moroha Zukuri, so it's got this double-sided pointy tip. But interesting fact is that the rear side of the blade isn't sharpened, which I was kind of surprised about. Now, that is not necessarily bad if you want to use it for aya or kata or something. It'll probably keep you from cutting your dinger off or chopping an appendage off, or maybe just, your pointer finger or something. But it's I thought it would be sharpened. As for, the history behind the stuff, I'm not good at history, but I'll probably blab on about something comical later. What I can tell you right now is that the overall shape of the blade is reasonably pleasing, and it seems well constructed, and it's held up pretty well considering it's a second-hand blade that's several years old. Now I'm going to show you some photos of the Tsukikore, and what you can see is that there's shims lining the inside where the nakago or the tang go for the blade. You might say that it's not good that it has shims in there, but I'm going to say, well, for a Chinese production company, I'm glad that they at least took time to put shims in there. You can also see that the Ito's a little bit loose in the blade. I don't know whether to tell you that this is loose because of time or because it came that way, but I can say that the Tsuka is not cracked and it's in good shape. Also, one more look at the Tsuba. It's really nice. You can see a lot of detail in there. Gotta give them props. I also like how the Nakago has a little bit of shapeliness to it, which you don't find in a lot of production katanas, especially at this price. What little I can add from a historical perspective is that I've owned other Koguru Maruso blades from Hanwei before. This is a little Krotachi made by Bugei, but forged by the Hanwei Forge. And I can tell you that they've done the shape before and done it for a long time. This sword style is actually relatively old, as you can see in this picture that's from a sword that's also old. But it's seen as a link between the Ken swords that were straight and old. And that's not a Ken Barbie doll, but a Ken sword that had a similar type tip. And anyway, it's from around 800 AD, and it's got some cool history behind it. But you're not listening to me because you want to hear history, or maybe you are, in which case you're probably going to fail your next history test. That's like going to a water fountain for taco salad. Now I will proceed to drone on about the Shobu Zukuri iteration of the Hanwei Raptor Katana series. The most notable difference is that there's a battle wrap. Frankly, most of the Hanwei series Raptor Katanas have this type of Ito wrap, but the other one didn't. So other than that, they're very similar. The fittings are the same. The saya is made of the same type of material. It also conceals stuff. The sayas are actually pretty well made in terms of how thick the lacquer is. They're pretty resilient to dings, even though both of the ones I have seem pretty fucked up. The fittings, again, are very well cast. You can make out fine details. Not to say that that's surprising, because I just said it before, but in a little bit more detail, you can make out some of the feathers on the bird, and a lot of times those things get lost in casting, especially when they do multiple castings. Little bits of crap get stuck in the mold, and then you lose some of the detail, and it's tough to maintain really nice, detailed castings of things, so I appreciate the efforts they must go through to do that. In terms of the blade, the lines on it are actually pretty clean. Most of the time when you're dealing with a sub $500 sword made of through-hardened mono steel stuff, there can be some blah in how the lines come together, and this actually seems pretty clean. The one I have has a damaged Kisaki. You can see that the tip is a little dinged. It came that way. Again, it's secondhand though, so you wouldn't expect to have that if you got it from Hanwei. The shape of the blade seems overall quite nice, but I will say one thing I found is that the handle on the Shobu Zukuri blade was very much axe-handly. Like it's the stereotypical axe handle thing that Hanwei gets criticized for from time to time. I didn't find it comfortable or easy to grip, and it was probably one of the most uncomfortable Sukas that I had from them. I have pretty large hands too, and it wasn't fun to hold on to. I will give Hanwei some props on the Nikago, or tang of the blade. Despite its rusty appearance here, it actually has more shape and attention paid to it than you see on a lot of production katana at the same price point. It goes to show that if they put detail there, they probably put detail in a lot of things. The Suka core on the Shobu blade didn't have any shims in it, and it wasn't cracked. Despite its somewhat unwieldy size, it was at least all intact, and I'll give them props on that. Unfortunately, the Ito was somewhat loose, and this is the second blade, even though they're secondhand and used, that the Ito is pretty loose on, and that is somewhat concerning to me. The Ito's not so loose that it's unusable or unwieldy, but it is a concern about how it would react over time and over prolonged use. But hey, they did the Suba in a way that's real pretty, right? So then it's okay? No, maybe not. But they did make the Suba pretty well. Check it out, there's two of them, and my hands. Anyway, the Habaki. One thing I'm trying to show you by this photo is just how tight the Habaki fits, and I like that there aren't a lot of spaces and that there's no big gaps in the Habaki. I thought this was a really nice and well-fit Habaki for a production katana at this price level. A lot of times you just don't see them fit this well, and there's more holes and spaces, so there's some attention to detail that I really think they nailed on this sumbitch. Time for cutting shit. We're going to start by pointing out that the back of the blade is not sharp. You see I'm hitting a water bottle with it and it's not working. The rest of the blade seemed to work fine because it is still a sword and these are plastic water bottles, and that does not demonstrate skill or prowess or real functionality. In fact, I could have probably hit the water bottle hard enough with the back of the blade to cut it even though it's not sharp. Anyway, I digress. The water bottles cut pretty well. It poked and stabbed pretty well. I didn't really have any particular issues using the blade, and I found this one to be the more comfortable of the two, at least in terms of wielding and cutting and stabbing stuff. The simple fact is, though, that cutting water bottles doesn't mean a goddamn bit of anything. Anything should be able to cut water bottles. You could probably make a sword out of turds and cut a water bottle with it. You probably would have to have some odd fiber in your diet if you did that, and maybe I don't know, you'd probably be dehydrated for, but it could probably work. Mythbusters did polish a turd after all, so we have to reevaluate what we think in cut water bottles, I suppose. However, when I started cutting larger targets, like tatami with a wooden core, or rolled newspapers with a wooden core, the blade actually did pretty well. I'm not a very good cutter, that's wildly apparent to you at this point, however, it did cut reasonably well. Now, this particular target is a very large rolled wetted newspaper, and it probably has about a 5.5 to 6 inch diameter. It's also got a wooden core in it, kind of set at an odd angle, but it's still got a wooden core, and it was able to cut through in a few strokes. I would like it if it was able to cut through in one, but I'm going to call that more my problem than the sword's problem. I found the Maru blade to be pretty easy control. In a lot of these cuts I'm not cutting through the target, but I still found it easy to maintain control of the blade. Now I'm going to move the sword around a little bit because folks have asked me to do it, though I think I feel and look kind of stupid doing it. Hopefully it gives you some idea of how well the blade flurls around, I guess. On any note, the point of balance is right about meow, and more here. There we go. That's somewhere. Yep, there. Good job. Anyway, I'm going to cut with the Shobu now. Testing both of these blades simultaneously gives me the ability to contrast the differences between the real time rather than rely on recollection of past experiences. What I can say is basically that the Shobu did a better job cutting, at least in my hands, and I found that surprising because I didn't really like the feeling of it more in my hands. In fact, I liked it quite a bit less. It felt a lot more axe-handly and unwieldy, but the results kind of suggest that it's a better cutter. It moved through the rolled newspaper and rolled tatami with wooden cores much better than the Maru blade did. It had a much more precise cut. There was less frailing and flizzering around. I know that's not really a word. It was also able to cut through the rolled newspaper in one cut, which is not something that I was able to successfully achieve with the Maru blade. Maybe I don't exactly like how it felt in my hand, but it's difficult to argue with the results that I was able to get through more of the targets better with the Shobu Zukuri blade. Now that doesn't mean that it was perfect. I certainly didn't make it through every time, and I knocked the stand over and I looked stupid a lot, but it still did a better job by contrast. Now for your entertainment and amusement, I will twirl the blade around a little bit. What you might notice in contrast from this one is I find the blade more difficult to stop and more difficult to start, and overall it feels more dead in my hands. It's not a nice tool. At least that's my opinion of it. It didn't feel good. Point of balance is a little further up the blade, but I can't necessarily explain it. It just didn't give me good vibes. The next thing I'm going to elaborate on is what happened after testing. Now, while both blades were pretty good and survived, the Ito was not unscathed. This is the most disappointing part of what results after testing. The Ito is so loose that I can move it on the Shobu Zukuri blade with relative ease, just a little bit of pressure, and this suggests that after some time it's going to require a re-wrap. It might become so loose that it's no longer functional. It needs to get taped up with the dreaded hockey tape of doom, which happens to a lot of practitioners. I will again state that these were both second-hand blades. I don't know how old they were or how well cared for they were, though I would estimate that probably not very well, given that they both came with some sort of damage. However, the Ito was not this loose when I started, and the fact that it is this loose now is relatively disappointing. Additionally, the Ito shows some sign of fraying, which isn't great, but it suggests that if you handle the blade a lot, it's going to get kind of ugly over time. The blades themselves, however, survived great. I mean, this is after testing. You're seeing it before I clean them up. And there's no real signs of damage other than what was there before. There's no edge rolling, there's no nicks, there's no damage, there's no bending, there's no twisting. All the rust and stuff that was there and the stains were pretty much there before I started. So I have to say that while I didn't avoid messing it up, they held up pretty well. Additionally, nothing's loose. Oftentimes when you test the blade like I do, which is kind of like testing a baseball bat and just swinging it really hard at lots of things, things tend to loosen up, and that wasn't the case here. What I can say is that the habaki on both blades is tight. It doesn't wiggle. The fuji, kashira, everything still seems to be in place. The suba also doesn't rattle or wiggle around at all. And those are all things that can certainly happen when you whack the sword into hard objects repeatedly for the purposes of your amusement. The other thing I'd state is that there are a lot of reviews on the Raptor Katanas on various forums as well as on YouTube, and most people don't complain about the Ito. Now, it happened on two different blades for me, one significantly worse than the other. However, it's not a common complaint from many users, and that should be noted while you're forming your opinion. The last thing I'd like to say about it is simply, is it worth it or not, right? These are relatively economically priced blades, and they're very durable. From that standpoint, I think they're a solid option for anyone looking for a practitioner piece, a cutting piece, something to that effect. I do personally prefer the practical series from Hanwei. I find it a little bit more maneuverable, agile, and it also holds up really well. This, however, is certainly a solid option if this is your bag. Simply not mine, though. I think I'm going to get rid of them. The fact that they're not for me shouldn't weigh heavily on your conscience, though. I tend not to keep many blades. If I did, my wife would probably divorce me. Well, she might anyway, frankly, but hey, not yet. In this particular video, what you're seeing is the blades after I've cleaned them up with Mother's Mag metal polish. The thing I'd like to point out is that while both blades did have some rust, they all but vanished, or the stains vanished after using the application of metal polish. Now, that doesn't always happen on some blades. Sometimes they pit very easily, or they don't clean up very easily. That wasn't the case for these. Again, I think that's a solid plus for a practitioner piece. They're easy to maintain. They don't break very easily. Those are all very solid pluses for people that are looking to actually get a cheap blade for the purposes of whacking it into shit. The question comes down to, is it worth it? Well, in my opinion, kinda, sorta. There's a lot of other options on the market right now, and this is a list of some that I've handled in the past. From personal experience, I think it falls kinda somewhere in the middle. I like the Ronin Katana, I like the Practical Plus probably a little bit more, but frankly I think it outperforms or feels a little bit better in my hand than the pieces from Dynasty Forge or Cold Steel. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's a solid option, and I don't really think you can go wrong. I mean, it's $270, and that's really a hell of a deal for this kind of sword. I hope you found this review helpful. If you did, click like or subscribe, or leave me negative feedback. That's also fun to read. Thanks again for watching. Cheers!